The train lurched to a stop at the Tucumcari Depot in New Mexico territory, and Olivia Anderson clutched her single carpetbag tighter, watching through the dusty window as her new life materialized in the harsh August sunlight of 1882. She had left Boston 3 weeks ago with 3 trunks full of belongings, but circumstances on the journey had stripped her of everything except the worn dress on her back, and this one small bag containing a spare undergarment, her mother's Bible, and a daguerreotype of parents now 5 years dead. The conductor called out the station, and Olivia stood on trembling legs, smoothing down her travel-stained blue calico dress that had once been her finest, but now bore the marks of too many wearings and not enough soap. At 22 years old, she had thought herself brave when she answered the advertisement for a mail-order bride. But now, as she stepped onto the platform with the desert heat hitting her like a physical blow, she wondered if desperation had been mistaken for courage. She scanned the sparse crowd for the man whose letters had been so kind, so full of promise. Carson Keller, rancher, 30 years old, seeking a wife to help build a life in the territory. His words had painted pictures of vast skies and honest work, of a small but sturdy ranch house and the dream of a family. She had written back with equal honesty about her situation, an orphan working as a seamstress in a boarding house, barely making enough to pay for her room. She had been truthful about everything except the shame she felt at having nothing to her name, no dowry, no prospects, no family to speak for her character. "Miss Anderson." A deep voice cut through her thoughts, and she turned to see a tall man removing his hat. He had sun-darkened skin, dark brown hair that needed cutting, and gray eyes that studied her with an intensity that made her breath catch. He was handsome in a weathered way, all sharp angles and lean muscle, and he wore working clothes, dusty chaps over denim pants, a faded blue shirt, and a bandana knotted at his throat. "Mr. Keller." She extended her gloved hand, grateful that at least her gloves had survived the journey intact. He took her hand gently, and she noticed the calluses even through the thin fabric. "I am glad you made it safely. The letter said you would arrive today. I have been here since early morning as I was not certain of the exact time." "The train was delayed in Kansas," she said, then looked down at her single bag. "I must explain about my luggage. You are here. That is what matters." His voice was steady, certain. "But you do not understand. There was a fire at the hotel in Kansas City where I was staying between trains. I lost everything. My clothes, my household items I was bringing, even the small inheritance I had sewn into the lining of my best coat for safekeeping." The words tumbled out, and she felt heat rising to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the New Mexico sun. "I have nothing to bring to this marriage. Nothing at all. I used the last of my ticket money to wire my landlady in Boston, and she managed to send just enough for me to complete the journey and buy this dress. I am arriving as your bride with less than a beggar would have." Carson Keller looked at her for a long moment, and Olivia felt her heart sinking. He would send her back. Of course he would. What man wanted a wife who came with nothing, who could contribute nothing? She was a burden, not a partner. Then he smiled, and it transformed his serious face entirely. "Miss Anderson, you already have everything you need." She stared at him, certain she had misheard. "I beg your pardon. You have 2 hands to work with, do you not, and a mind that wrote those fine letters. You have courage enough to travel across the country alone, and honesty enough to tell me the truth when you could have waited and hidden it." He picked up her single bag as though it weighed nothing. "The things that were lost can be replaced. The things you carry with you cannot be purchased at any price." Tears pricked at her eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. She had not cried when the hotel burned. nor when the manager told her the insurance would not cover guests' belongings, nor even when she realized she would arrive at her new home with nothing to recommend her. But this unexpected kindness threatened to undo her completely. "I do not know what to say," she managed. "Say you are hungry. It is a 2-hour ride to the ranch, and I thought we might stop at the hotel dining room for a proper meal before we head out. Unless you would prefer to leave immediately, a meal would be most welcome." Her stomach had been empty since the previous evening, when a kind fellow passenger had shared some bread and cheese. The hotel was a simple establishment, but clean, and the dining room smelled of roasted meat and fresh bread. Carson guided her to a table near the window and ordered for them both pot roast with vegetables and coffee strong enough to strip paint, as he put it with a small smile. As they ate, Olivia found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. Carson asked about her journey, and she told him about the endless prairies, the mountains that had taken her breath away, the brief terror of the fire, and the kindness of strangers who had helped her salvage what little she could. "You worked as a seamstress?" he asked, cutting his meat with careful precision. "Since I was 16. My mother taught me before she died. I can sew almost anything, mend, alter, even design if given the materials. I worked for Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house. She let me have a room in exchange for work." "The ranch house needs curtains," Carson said thoughtfully, "and I have clothes that need mending. I am better with cattle than with a needle. I can do that." Relief flooded through her. She could contribute something after all. "I should tell you about the ranch," he continued, setting down his fork. "It is not large. I have about 300 head of cattle, some horses, chickens. The house is 3 rooms, nothing fancy but solid. I built it myself 4 years ago. There is a Mexican woman, Rosa, who comes from the nearby settlement twice a week to help with the heavy cleaning and laundry, though I have been managing the cooking myself. It is not what a Boston lady might be accustomed to. Mr. Keller, I was not living as a fine lady in Boston. I shared a room with 2 other women and worked 14 hours a day for barely enough to survive. Whatever you have will be a palace by comparison." He studied her across the table. "Why did you answer my advertisement, truly?" She met his eyes, those steady gray eyes that seemed to see right through her. "Because I wanted a different life. Because I wanted to build something, to have a home, perhaps children someday. Because your letters sounded kind and honest, and I thought we might make a good partnership. And because staying in Boston meant slowly disappearing, becoming invisible, working until I was too old to work anymore, and then dying alone in some charity house. I answered my own advertisement for similar reasons," he said. "This land is hard and it is lonely. I can manage the physical work, but a ranch is meant to be a home, and a home needs more than one person. I want children, a family. I want to build something that lasts. Then we want the same things. I believe we do." He paused, then reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was warm and rough against hers. "I think we should be honest with each other from the start, Miss Anderson. I will not pretend this will be easy. The work is hard, the weather is harsh, and there are difficulties I have not mentioned in my letters because I did not want to frighten you off. But I will treat you with respect. I will provide for you as best I am able, and I will be faithful to the vows we take. I hope you can promise me the same." "I can, and I do promise." Her voice was steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "Then we should get married today before we ride out to the ranch. The circuit preacher is in town, staying at the church, if you are willing." It was all moving so fast, but what was the alternative? She had come here for this purpose, and delaying would only make it more awkward. "I am willing." They finished their meal in companionable silence, and then Carson paid the bill and guided her down the dusty main street to a small whitewashed church at the edge of town. The preacher was a jovial man named Reverend Thompson, round and red-faced, who asked no questions when Carson explained their situation. He called in his wife and the church sexton as witnesses, and within 15 minutes, Olivia Anderson became Olivia Keller in a ceremony so simple and quick it felt almost dreamlike. Carson produced a plain gold band that he slipped onto her finger, and when the reverend pronounced them man and wife, Carson leaned down and kissed her cheek with a gentleness that made her heart squeeze. It was not the wedding she had dreamed of as a girl, but it felt real and honest in a way those girlish fantasies never had. The ride to the ranch was long and dusty, with Carson driving a sturdy wagon pulled by 2 horses. Olivia sat beside her new husband, watching the landscape change from the scrubby outskirts of town to open rangeland dotted with cattle. The sky was impossibly vast, a blue so deep it hurt to look at, and the air smelled of sage and dust and something wild she could not name. "It is beautiful," she said, and meant it. "It grows on you," Carson replied. "When I first came here from Missouri, I thought it was the most desolate place on earth. Now I cannot imagine living anywhere else." "Why did you leave Missouri?" His hands tightened on the reins. "My father died and my older brother inherited the farm. He made it clear there was no place for me there. So I took what money I had saved and came west to make my own way. I am sorry about your father." It was 8 years ago now. The grief has dulled. He glanced at her. "Tell me about your parents." So she did, talking about her mother who had taught her to sew and sing, her father who had worked as a clerk until a fever took him, and then her mother following 6 months later, leaving Olivia alone at 17 with nothing but her sewing skills to keep her alive. Carson listened without interruption, and she found herself telling him things she had never told anyone, about the loneliness and the fear and the determination to survive. The sun was lowering toward the horizon when they finally turned off the main road onto a smaller track that wound between low hills. Olivia could see cattle grazing in the distance, and then the house came into view, a low structure of adobe and wood with a covered porch and a stone chimney. It was small, as Carson had said, but it looked solid and well built, situated near a line of cottonwood trees that marked a creek. There was a barn beyond the house, a corral with several horses, and a chicken coop from which she could hear the sound of hens settling for the evening. "Home," Carson said simply, pulling the wagon to a stop. He helped her down, his hands strong around her waist, and for a moment they stood there in the fading light, this man and woman who were now bound together by law and faith. Olivia felt a flutter of nervousness about the coming night, about sharing a house and a life with this stranger, but underneath the nervousness was a tentative hope. Carson seemed to sense her apprehension. "Let me show you the house," he said, releasing her and retrieving her bag from the wagon. "You must be exhausted." The interior of the house was dim and cool after the heat outside. Carson lit a lantern, and Olivia saw a main room with a stone fireplace, a table and chairs, a rocking chair, shelves lined with books and supplies. A doorway led to what must be the bedroom, and another to what Carson explained was a small room he used for storage, but which could be converted to a nursery or additional bedroom as needed. "I have been sleeping out here," he said, gesturing to a bedroll near the fireplace. "The bedroom is yours. I thought, until we are more comfortable with each other, we might maintain separate sleeping arrangements." The relief must have shown on her face because he smiled slightly. "We are married, Olivia, but we are also strangers. There is no rush. We have time to know each other." "Thank you," she whispered. "You are very kind." "I am practical," he corrected gently. "A marriage works best when both people are willing participants, not when one is frightened or forced. Now, are you hungry again? I can make some supper." "Let me," she said quickly. "Please." I want to be useful." He showed her the kitchen area, which was part of the main room, and the supplies he had. There was not much to work with: dried beans and salt pork, some flour and cornmeal, a few eggs from the chickens. But Olivia had learned to make meals from less, and within an hour she had produced a simple but hearty supper of beans and cornbread. They ate together at the table, and Carson complimented her cooking with what seemed like genuine appreciation. Afterward, he showed her where the creek ran for washing, how to manage the stove, where he kept the lamp oil and matches. He treated her like a partner, explaining rather than commanding, asking her opinions on small matters like where she thought certain supplies should be stored. As darkness fell completely, Olivia found herself yawning despite her best efforts to stay alert. The exhaustion of the journey was catching up with her. "Go to bed," Carson said. "I will bank the fire and settle the animals for the night." The bedroom was sparse but clean, with a large bed covered in quilts, a dresser, and a washstand. Olivia opened her carpetbag and took out her nightdress, then poured water from the pitcher into the basin and washed the dust of travel from her face and hands. She brushed out her long blonde hair, braided it, and slipped into bed. The sheets smelled of sunshine and sage, and the mattress was surprisingly comfortable. Through the open window, she could hear the night sounds of the ranch: the lowing of distant cattle, the chirp of crickets, the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods. It was so different from Boston, from the sounds of carriages and voices and the constant press of humanity. Here, there was space and silence and stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. She heard Carson come back inside, the soft sounds of him moving around the main room, and then the house fell quiet. Olivia lay in the darkness, her hand touching the gold band on her finger, and wondered what tomorrow would bring. She had been so focused on getting here, on escaping Boston and finding a new life, that she had not thought much beyond the arrival. Now she was here, married to a man she did not know, in a place that was utterly foreign to her, with no possessions and no certainty except that she had made a choice and would have to live with it. But Carson had said she already had everything she needed, and as sleep began to claim her, Olivia chose to believe him. She woke to the sound of someone moving around the house, and for a moment she was disoriented, expecting to see the cramped bedroom she had shared in Boston. Then memory returned and she sat up quickly, seeing pale dawn light through the window. She dressed hurriedly in the same blue calico dress, wincing at how wrinkled and worn it was, and went out to the main room. Carson was at the stove, frying eggs and salt pork. He turned when he heard her and smiled. "Good morning. I hope I did not wake you. I am accustomed to rising early." She moved to the table, feeling awkward. "What can I do to help? Sit and eat." "Afterward, I thought I could show you around the ranch properly, introduce you to the animals and the layout of things. Then perhaps we can ride into the settlement, meet Rosa and some of the neighbors." The settlement turned out to be a small cluster of adobe houses about 5 miles from the ranch, home to several Mexican families and a few Anglo settlers. Rosa was a cheerful woman in her 40s with work-worn hands and a smile that reached her eyes. She spoke a mixture of English and Spanish, and she immediately took Olivia under her wing, exclaiming over her lack of proper clothes and promising to help her make new ones. "My daughter, she has cloth," Rosa said. "Good cloth. She will sell cheap for Senor Carson's new wife. And I teach you to make the tortillas, yes, the good food for hard-working man." Olivia found herself smiling, warmed by the woman's kindness. Rosa introduced her to the other women in the settlement, and they too were welcoming, offering advice on everything from how to make soap to which plants in the area were edible. It was so different from Boston, where everyone had been too busy and too tired to offer much beyond basic civility. On the ride back to the ranch, Olivia said, "Everyone was so kind." "Good people," Carson agreed. "They have been helpful to me since I arrived. The land here is too hard for people to make enemies over small things. We all help each other." Over the next few days, Olivia began to settle into the rhythm of ranch life. She rose at dawn, made breakfast, and then tackled whatever tasks needed doing. Carson was patient with her ignorance, teaching her how to milk the cow he kept for household use, how to gather eggs without disturbing the hens too much, how to recognize the signs of weather changes in the endless sky. In turn, she mended his clothes, made curtains for the windows from some old sheets Rosa provided, and experimented with cooking over the temperamental stove. She was not successful at everything. The first time she tried to make bread, it came out so hard Carson joked they could use it to repair the barn wall. But she learned, and Carson never made her feel foolish for her mistakes. They talked during meals, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future. Olivia learned that Carson had fought briefly in the Lincoln County War when he first arrived in New Mexico. Though he refused to talk much about it, beyond saying it had taught him that violence solved nothing. He loved books and read whenever he had a spare moment, mostly histories and agricultural texts, but also some poetry that surprised her. He wanted to expand the ranch, not to become wealthy but to build something sustainable that could support a family. For her part, Olivia told him about her dreams of having a real home, of children who would never know the poverty and loneliness she had experienced. She talked about her love of sewing, how it was not just a skill but an art form to her, the way fabric could be transformed into something beautiful and useful. She confessed her fear that she would not be able to adapt to ranch life, that she would fail him somehow. "You are doing fine," Carson said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Better than fine. The house already feels different, more like a home." "I want to be a good wife to you," Olivia said quietly. "I want this to work." He turned to look at her, and in the fading light his eyes were very gray and very serious. "It is working. We are building something together, Olivia. It takes time, but I can feel it happening. Can you?" She nodded because it was true. The awkwardness between them was fading, replaced by a comfortable companionship. She found herself looking forward to his return when he was out with the cattle, found herself noticing small things about him, the way he was gentle with the horses, the way he always thanked her for meals, the way he sometimes sang to himself when he thought no one was listening. A week after her arrival, Rosa and her daughter Maria arrived with bundles of fabric. "For making clothes," Rosa announced. "Maria, she has too much and she sell to you at good price." The fabric was simple but serviceable, calico and cotton in various colors. Olivia ran her hands over it, feeling the familiar texture, and felt a surge of excitement. She could make herself proper dresses, maybe even a nice shirt for Carson. "How much?" she asked, though she had no money at all. Carson stepped forward. "I will pay for whatever Olivia needs. And Maria, I have some beef I can trade as well if that interests you." They negotiated for a few minutes, and then Carson was carrying bolts of fabric into the house while Rosa and Maria stayed for coffee and conversation. Olivia found herself laughing at Rosa's stories about her many children and grandchildren, feeling more relaxed than she had in years. After they left, Olivia spread the fabric out on the table, already planning patterns in her mind. "I will make you a shirt first," she told Carson. "That one you are wearing has more holes than fabric. I would appreciate that." He leaned against the door frame, watching her. "You look happy." "I am," she realized. "This is something I am good at, something I can do to contribute." "You contribute every day just by being here." She looked up at him, and something in his expression made her heart skip. He was looking at her not as a partner or a housekeeper, but as a woman, and she realized with a start that she had been seeing him differently too. Not as the stranger she had married, but as a man, strong and kind and handsome in his rough way. The air between them seemed to thicken, and then Carson cleared his throat and turned away. "I should check on the horses. Call me when supper is ready." After he left, Olivia stood at the table with her hands on the fabric, trying to sort through her feelings. They had married for practical reasons, but something else was growing between them, something that made her pulse race and her thoughts scatter when he was near. She did not know if he felt it too, or if she was imagining things, seeing what she wanted to see. That night, as she lay in bed, she heard Carson moving restlessly in the main room, and she wondered if he was as unsettled as she was. The heat of August gave way to September, and the temperature cooled slightly though the days were still warm. Olivia finished the shirt for Carson and made herself 2 new dresses, then started on curtains and tablecloths. Her hands were never idle, and Carson often came in to find her sewing by lamplight, her needle flashing in the golden glow. "You will ruin your eyes working in such dim light," he said one evening. "I am nearly finished with this seam." She bit off the thread and held up a pillowcase neatly hemmed. "There, now we can have matching pillowcases." He took it from her, examining her tiny, precise stitches. "You are an artist. This is beautiful work." The compliment warmed her. "It is only a pillowcase." "It is care and skill and something made to last. That is worth appreciating." He set it down and held out his hand. "Come outside for a moment. There is something I want to show you." Curious, she took his hand and let him lead her out onto the porch. The night was clear and cool, and the stars were scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Carson pointed upward. "There. You see that bright star? That is Venus. And that cluster there, that is the Pleiades. My father taught me the stars when I was a boy. He said they were useful for navigation, but I always thought they were just beautiful." Olivia looked up, overwhelmed by the vastness of the sky. "We could never see them like this in Boston. Too many buildings, too much smoke. One of the benefits of living out here. Space to breathe, room to see." His hand was still holding hers, and he did not let go. "Are you happy here, Olivia? Truly?" "Yes," she said, and meant it. "It is hard work, and there is much I still do not know, but yes, I am happy. Are you?" "Happier than I have been in a long time." He turned to face her, and in the starlight his face was all shadows and angles. "I was worried that you would regret coming here, that you would find it too harsh, too lonely. I was more lonely in a city of thousands than I am here with just you." The words came out before she could stop them, and she felt her cheeks heat. Carson stepped closer, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Olivia," he said softly, and then he was kissing her. It was nothing like the chaste peck at their wedding. This was a real kiss, warm and gentle and full of longing. Olivia's hands came up to grip his shoulders, and she kissed him back with all the confused feelings that had been building inside her for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Carson rested his forehead against hers. "I did not want to rush you," he said. "I wanted to give you time. But Olivia, I am in love with you. I think I have been falling in love with you since you stepped off that train with nothing but honesty and courage." "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not expect it to happen so quickly, but it did." He kissed her again, longer this time, and when he pulled back his eyes were dark with emotion. "I want you to be my wife in truth if you are willing, but only if you are willing. I will not force this." "I am willing," she said, her heart pounding. "I want to be your wife in every way." He swept her up in his arms, making her gasp and laugh, and carried her into the house and through to the bedroom. He set her down gently beside the bed, and they came together with a tenderness that brought tears to Olivia's eyes. This was what she had hoped for, what she had dreamed of in her most secret heart, not just a marriage of convenience, but a true union built on love and respect and desire. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the quilts, Carson's hand stroking her hair, Olivia felt a completeness she had never known before. "I was so afraid when I came here," she murmured against his chest. "I thought you would be disappointed in me." "Never." His arms tightened around her. "You are everything I wanted and more than I dared hope for. When I said you already had everything you needed, I meant it. But I did not realize then that what I needed was you." She tilted her head up to kiss him, and they made love again, slower this time, learning each other's bodies and preferences. When they finally fell asleep, dawn was not far off, and Olivia thought that she had never been so perfectly content. The next weeks passed in a haze of happiness. They worked together during the day, rode out to check on the cattle, mended fences, prepared for the coming winter. In the evenings, they talked and read together, and at night they lost themselves in each other, building a physical intimacy that deepened their emotional bond. Olivia blossomed in the New Mexico sun, her skin taking on a healthy glow, her body growing stronger from the physical work. She learned to ride properly, not the sedate side-saddle riding she had done once or twice in Boston, but real riding, astride and fast. Carson taught her to shoot, insisting that she needed to be able to protect herself and the ranch when he was away. She proved to be a decent shot, and the small revolver he gave her became a constant companion when she was outside alone. October brought cooler weather and the start of preparations for winter. Carson and some men from the settlement rounded up the cattle, checking them for disease and marking the new calves. Olivia helped Rosa and the other women put up preserves, dry meat, and store vegetables from the small gardens. It was hard, constant work, but there was a satisfaction to it that her old life had never provided. One afternoon in late October, Olivia was in the settlement with Rosa, helping to make cheese when Maria's oldest son came running up with news. "Raiders," he gasped. "They hit the Barnes place last night, took some cattle and horses." Olivia felt her blood run cold. The Barnes ranch was only 10 miles from Carson's place. Were they hurt? "No, Senora, they were in the house and heard nothing until morning." When she got back to the ranch that evening, Carson was already there, his face grim. "You heard?" "Yes. What will you do?" "I am riding out with some of the other ranchers tomorrow to see if we can track them. It is probably just drifters, looking for easy pickings before winter, but we need to make it clear that this area is not easy pickings." He pulled her close. "I want you to stay here with Rosa. She will come and stay until I get back." "How long will you be gone?" "A few days at most. We will see if we can find their trail, maybe recover some of the stock." He tilted her face up. "I will be careful, I promise." But Olivia could not shake the fear that tightened around her heart. She had heard stories about violence in the territory, about rustlers and outlaws and sudden death. The thought of Carson riding into danger made her feel sick. He left at dawn the next morning, riding out with 6 other men from the area. Rosa arrived shortly after, bringing her youngest daughter for company. The 2 women kept busy, but Olivia found herself constantly watching the horizon, jumping at every sound. 2 days passed with no word. On the 3rd day, Olivia was hanging laundry when she saw riders approaching. Her heart leaped until she realized it was only 4 men, not the 7 who had left. As they got closer, she recognized Carson on his big bay horse, and relief flooded through her so strongly her knees went weak. He dismounted and caught her as she ran to him. "I am all right," he said into her hair. "I am all right. The others, 2 decided to turn back yesterday. One twisted his ankle and another had to help him home. We tracked the raiders to the territorial line and recovered most of Barnes' stock. They decided not to push their luck and moved on. That night, Olivia clung to him in bed, unable to shake the memory of her fear. "I cannot lose you," she whispered. "I did not realize until you were gone how much I need you. You are not going to lose me. I am too stubborn to die young." He kissed her forehead. "But I understand. I thought about you constantly while I was gone, about coming home to you, about our life together. Olivia, I want to start a family. I want children with you. Is that something you still want?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, I want that." As fall deepened into early winter, Olivia began to hope that she might be pregnant. Her monthly courses, always regular, did not come in November. She said nothing to Carson at first, not wanting to raise hopes prematurely, but as December arrived and still nothing happened, she became more certain. She finally told him on a cold December evening as they sat by the fire. "Carson, I think I am carrying our child." He went very still, then pulled her onto his lap, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. I have missed my courses twice now, and I have been feeling queasy in the mornings. A child." His voice was full of wonder. "We are going to have a child." They held each other for a long time, both overwhelmed by the magnitude of it. They were going to be parents. They were going to bring a new life into the world, a child who would be the living symbol of their love. The winter was mild by New Mexico standards, though Olivia found it cold compared to her years indoors in Boston. Her pregnancy progressed smoothly, though the morning sickness was miserable, and she found herself exhausted by the smallest tasks. Carson was endlessly patient, taking over more of the household work, insisting she rest. Rosa became her constant advisor, telling her what to expect, what to eat, how to prepare for the birth. The other women in the settlement also offered advice and support, knitting tiny clothes and offering hand-me-down baby items. Olivia was touched by their generosity and realized how much her life had changed. She was no longer alone. She was part of a community, a family. In February, as her belly grew round and full, Carson began work on converting the storage room into a nursery. He built a cradle from cottonwood, carefully sanded and polished, and Olivia made bedding and tiny gowns from the softest fabric Maria could provide. They argued playfully about names, Carson favoring traditional family names while Olivia wanted something more unique. "What if it is a boy?" Carson asked one evening, his hand resting on her belly as the baby kicked. "I like the name Thomas," Olivia said. "Or perhaps James. Thomas is good. Strong, and if it is a girl, Claire, or maybe Elizabeth." "Elizabeth Keller," Carson smiled. "I like that." But when the baby finally arrived on a warm day in May, after 12 hours of labor with Rosa and Carson both at her side, it was a boy, red-faced and howling with indignation at being thrust into the world. "Thomas," Olivia whispered, exhausted and overwhelmed and more in love than she had ever thought possible. "Thomas Carson Keller." Carson held his son with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect. You are perfect. God, Olivia, I love you." Those first weeks with a newborn were exhausting and chaotic. Thomas was a hungry baby who wanted to eat constantly, and Olivia was sore and tired and leaking milk at inconvenient times. But she was also happier than she had ever been. Carson was an attentive father, walking the floor with Thomas when he fussed, changing him without complaint, singing to him in a surprisingly good baritone. "I never knew you could sing," Olivia said one night, listening to Carson croon a lullaby. "My mother taught me." She said music was good for babies. He looked down at his son, now sleeping peacefully. "I want him to have everything I did not: security, love, a real home." He has all of that, Olivia assured him. He has us. The months passed in a blur of baby milestones and ranch work. Thomas grew from a squalling newborn to a chubby infant who smiled and cooed, then to a determined crawler who got into everything. The ranch prospered, with Carson able to sell cattle at a good price and purchase more land to expand the grazing area. On their first wedding anniversary, Carson surprised Olivia with a gift. It was a necklace, simple silver with a single small turquoise stone. "I had it made in town," he said as he fastened it around her neck. "I wanted to give you something that would last. It is beautiful." She touched the stone, feeling tears prick her eyes. "I have something for you as well." She handed him a package wrapped in fabric, and he opened it to find a shirt she had made, not from calico but from fine linen she had saved for months to afford. It was white with careful stitching and mother-of-pearl buttons, the finest thing she had ever made. "For special occasions," she said, "or for whenever you want to feel fancy." He pulled her close and kissed her deeply. "I love it, I love you. This year has been the best of my life." "Mine too," she whispered. "I arrived here with nothing, but I found everything." "No," Carson corrected gently. "You already had everything. You just needed a place where you could flourish." 2 more years passed in contentment. Thomas grew into a bright, active toddler who loved the horses and followed his father everywhere. Olivia became pregnant again and gave birth to a daughter in the spring of 1885, a tiny dark-haired girl they named Claire Rose. The ranch continued to grow, and Carson hired a young man named Miguel to help with the heavier work. Olivia's days were full of children and household work, but she still found time for her sewing. She had begun taking in orders from the growing town of Tucumcari, making dresses and shirts and even a wedding gown for the banker's daughter. It was satisfying work that brought in additional money and allowed her to practice her art. On a hot afternoon in July, as Olivia sat on the porch mending and watching Thomas play with the barn cats while Claire napped inside, she reflected on how far she had come. 4 years ago, she had stepped off a train with nothing but a carpetbag and fear, and now she had a home, a family, a life full of love and purpose. Carson rode up from the south pasture and dismounted, coming to sit beside her. He was dusty and tired but smiling. "Thomas just tried to convince me that he is old enough to help with the cattle drive next month." "He is 3 years old." I explained that. He was not convinced. Carson took off his hat and wiped his forehead. "Miguel suggested we might need another hand for the drive." "I was thinking of asking Rosa's nephew. He is 17 and a hard worker." "Whatever you think is best." She set down her mending and leaned against him. "I was just thinking about the day I arrived. Do you remember what you said to me? That you already had everything you needed. Did you really believe that, or were you just being kind?" He was quiet for a moment, his arm coming around her shoulders. "I believed it. You had courage and honesty and strength. Those things cannot be bought or given. They come from inside. But I will admit, I did not know if it would be enough. I did not know if we could build a real marriage, a real life together. And now I know that what we have built is stronger than anything I could have imagined. You are my partner, my love, the mother of my children. You make this house a home, you make me a better man." He tilted her face up and kissed her. "I love you, Olivia Keller." "I love you too, Carson, more than I can say." Thomas ran up to the porch, demanding attention, and Claire woke inside with a cry. Olivia stood to tend to her daughter while Carson scooped up his son. As she settled Claire to nurse, watching her husband and son through the window, Olivia felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had come west looking for a new life, and she had found so much more. She had found love, family, purpose, and a home that was truly hers. The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Thomas grew tall and serious, a boy who loved reading as much as riding. Claire was her opposite, wild and fearless, always climbing trees and chasing after the ranch dogs. In 1887, Olivia gave birth to another boy, Peter, who was quiet and thoughtful from birth. The ranch expanded further, with Carson purchasing adjoining land and increasing the herd. They were not wealthy by city standards, but they were comfortable, with enough to meet their needs and save for the future. Carson built an addition onto the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper parlor where Olivia could entertain the neighbors. The settlement grew into a small town, with a proper church and school. When Thomas turned 6, he began attending, riding to town with Carson each morning and returning in the afternoon full of stories about his lessons. Olivia sometimes went with them, visiting with the other mothers, shopping at the general store that now stocked fabrics and threads specifically for her orders. Life was good, busy and full and occasionally exhausting, but deeply satisfying. Olivia and Carson had built not just a ranch but a legacy, something that would outlast them both. They had created a family, a community, a life that mattered. On their 10th anniversary, they left the children with Rosa and rode out to a spot Carson had found, a high point overlooking the ranch and the valley beyond. They spread a blanket and sat watching the sunset, much as they had on those early evenings when they were just beginning to know each other. "You ever miss Boston?" Carson asked. "Never." Olivia laced her fingers through his. "That was not living. This is living." "I am glad you answered my advertisement. I am glad you said I already had everything I needed, even if I did not believe you at the time. You proved me right." He pulled her close, and they watched the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red and purple. "Do you remember that first night after we were married? I could barely sleep. I kept thinking that I had rushed you, that I had been foolish to expect this to work. I was thinking the same thing. I was terrified." She smiled at the memory. "And then you were so patient, so kind, and I realized that maybe it could work after all. More than work, thrive." He kissed her temple. "I want to grow old with you, Olivia. I want to watch our children grow and have children of their own. I want to sit on that porch when we are 80 and remember all of this. Then that is what we will do," she said. "Together." They stayed until the stars came out, those same bright stars that had witnessed their first kiss, and then rode home in the warm darkness, secure in their love and their life together. The next decade brought changes and challenges. Drought years tested the ranch's resources, and they lost some cattle, but they persevered. Thomas grew into a young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Claire shocked everyone by announcing at 16 that she wanted to be a teacher, and Carson paid for her to attend normal school in Santa Fe. Peter showed an aptitude for mechanics and spent hours taking apart and reassembling anything he could get his hands on. Olivia's hair began to show threads of silver, and Carson's face gained more lines, but their love deepened rather than faded. They still sat on the porch in the evenings, still found time to ride out together when ranch work allowed, still came together in the night with a passion that had mellowed but never disappeared. In 1897, Thomas married a girl from Tucumcari, and they built a house on the far edge of the ranch property. A year later, they presented Olivia and Carson with their first grandchild, a girl named Sarah. Holding her granddaughter for the first time, Olivia was overcome with emotion, seeing in that tiny face the future stretching out endlessly. "We did it," she whispered to Carson that night. "We built something that will last." "You did it," he corrected. "You came here with nothing and created all of this." I was just lucky enough to be part of it. We did it together, she insisted. Neither of us could have done it alone. He could not argue with that. Claire came home from teaching in 1899 and shocked them by bringing a fiancé, a lawyer from Santa Fe. Carson was not thrilled about his daughter marrying a city man, but the young man proved himself during a visit to the ranch, working hard and showing genuine interest in their life. They were married in the little church in Tucumcari, and Claire eventually convinced her husband to open a practice in town rather than the capital. Peter left for Denver in 1900, determined to learn about the new automobiles that were beginning to appear. He wrote regularly, and Olivia treasured his letters, though she worried about him in the big city. As the new century began, Olivia was 51 and Carson 59. They were grandparents 4 times over, with more grandchildren likely on the way. The ranch was thriving under Thomas's management, though Carson still rode out most days to check on things. Their hair was gray and their bodies bore the marks of decades of hard work, but they were healthy and happy. One evening in early spring, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Carson said, "I have been thinking." "About what?" "About that day you arrived. About how scared you looked, how brave you were pretending not to be. About how you told me you had nothing, and I told you that you already had everything you needed. I remember. I have been thinking about how right I was, but not for the reasons I thought at the time." He turned to face her, taking her hands in his. "I thought I meant that you had courage and honesty and strength. And you did have those things. But what you really had, what you really brought to this marriage and this life, was the ability to love. To open yourself up to loving me, loving this place, loving our children. That was what we both needed, and it was what made everything else possible." Olivia felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I loved you the moment you said I already had everything I needed. I did not realize it at the time, but looking back, that was when my heart made its choice. And I loved you the moment I saw you standing on that platform, trying so hard to be brave. I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen." They held each other as the sun set and the stars came out, 2 people who had found each other against the odds and built a life that exceeded their wildest dreams. They had started with nothing, 2 lonely people looking for something better, and they had created everything. A home, a family, a love that would endure long after they were gone. "No regrets?" Carson asked softly. "Not a single one." Olivia smiled through her tears. "You told me I already had everything I needed, and you were right, but what I needed most was you." They sat together in the gathering darkness, surrounded by the life they had built, and knew that they had found what so many search for but few ever find. They had found home. They had found love. They had found each other. Years continued their steady march, and the Kellers became a fixture in the Tucumcari community. Carson finally stepped back from daily ranch management in 1905, handing the reins fully to Thomas while he focused on mentoring younger ranchers and serving on the town council. Olivia's sewing room became a gathering place for women in the area, where she taught sewing and quilting while dispensing advice on everything from child rearing to marriage. Peter returned from Denver in 1906 with a wife, a bright young woman named Helen who shared his passion for mechanics. They settled in Tucumcari and opened a garage that serviced the increasing number of automobiles appearing in the territory. Claire and her husband had 3 children and were pillars of the community, with Claire serving as principal of the town school. The grandchildren multiplied, and the Keller family gatherings became legendary, with dozens of people crowding into the ranch house and spilling out onto the grounds. Olivia would stand in the kitchen, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, and marvel at how her life had unfolded. The scared young woman who had stepped off the train with nothing had become a matriarch, the center of a large and loving family. In 1912, New Mexico achieved statehood, and the Kellers joined the celebration in Tucumcari with the rest of the territory. Carson was 70 years old now, moving slower but still sharp as ever. Olivia was 62, her hands marked by arthritis but still capable of beautiful needlework. They had been married 30 years, 3 decades of partnership and love that had only grown stronger with time. That night, after the celebrations died down and they returned to the ranch, they lay in bed together in the darkness. 30 years, Carson said. It does not seem possible, I know. Sometimes I still feel like that frightened girl on the train platform. Olivia turned to face him, though she could barely see him in the darkness. Do you ever think about what might have happened if I had not answered your advertisement? If that hotel had not burned, if I had turned back? I try not to. The thought of a life without you is unbearable. I might have died in Boston, alone and forgotten, or married some other man who saw me as a servant rather than a partner. She reached out and found his hand. Instead, I found you. I found this life. I found happiness I did not know existed. We found each other, Carson corrected gently. And we built this together. Every bit of it. As they drifted off to sleep, Olivia thought about all the things that had to happen for her to end up here. The poverty that forced her to consider becoming a mail-order bride. The fire that took her possessions. The courage to continue the journey anyway. Carson's kindness in accepting her despite her circumstances. All of it had led to this moment, to this life, to this profound sense of contentment and completion. The years that followed were quieter but no less full. Carson's health began to decline in 1915, his heart weakening after a bout of pneumonia. He could no longer ride far or work long hours, but he seemed content to sit on the porch and watch the ranch operations, offering advice when Thomas asked for it. Olivia stayed close, always within reach, their companionship as strong as ever. One warm afternoon in September 1916, as they sat on the porch watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard, Carson said, "I want you to know that these have been the best years of my life. Every single day with you has been a gift." "Do not talk like you are saying goodbye," Olivia said, though fear clutched at her heart. "You are not going anywhere. We are all going somewhere eventually. I just want you to know, while I can say it, that loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life." He took her hand, his grip weaker than it used to be but still warm. "When you are gone, I want you to remember that you made me happier than I ever thought possible. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me everything. You gave me everything first," Olivia whispered, tears streaming down her face. "That day on the platform when you said I already had everything I needed, you changed my life. You saw value in me when I had nothing to offer. You loved me when I did not know how to love myself. You made me believe that I was enough." They sat together as the sun moved across the sky, neither speaking, just being together as they had been for 34 years. That night, Carson passed peacefully in his sleep, with Olivia beside him as she had been every night of their marriage. The grief was overwhelming, a physical pain that made it hard to breathe. But Olivia found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy they had built together. The funeral was attended by what seemed like half the county, all the people whose lives had been touched by Carson's kindness and integrity. After everyone left, after the casseroles had been eaten and the condolences had been offered, Olivia stood alone on the porch and looked out at the ranch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in those familiar colors, and she could almost feel Carson beside her. She touched the silver and turquoise necklace she still wore every day, the anniversary gift from so long ago. "You were right," she said to the empty air. "I did have everything I needed." But what I needed most was you, and you found me anyway. Thank you for that. Thank you for everything." The years after Carson's death were not easy, but Olivia persevered as she always had. She moved into town eventually, living with Claire and her family, but she returned to the ranch often. She continued to sew and teach, to be a presence in her grandchildren's and great-grandchildren's lives. She told them stories about their grandfather, about the early days of the ranch, about coming west with nothing and finding everything. On a spring day in 1925, at the age of 75, Olivia felt her own time coming. She was surrounded by family, 3 generations gathered around her bed. Thomas held one hand and Claire the other, and Peter stood at the foot of the bed with tears streaming down his face. "I am not afraid," Olivia told them. "I am going to see your father again. I have missed him terribly." "We love you, Mama," Claire said, her voice breaking. "I love you all. You were my greatest joy, you and your father. You made my life complete." She looked at each of them, memorizing their faces. "Remember that love is what matters, not money or possessions or status. Love is what builds a life worth living. Your father taught me that, and I want you to carry it forward." As her eyes grew heavy, Olivia thought about that day so long ago when she had stepped off the train with nothing but a carpet bag and fear. She thought about Carson's words, that she already had everything she needed. He had been right in ways neither of them could have imagined then. She had brought courage and honesty and the capacity to love, and those things had been enough to build a life that spanned decades and generations. Her last thought was of Carson, of his gray eyes and gentle smile, of the way he had made her feel seen and valued when she thought she was invisible. She could almost hear his voice saying, "You already have everything you need," and she smiled as she slipped away to find him again. The Keller Ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family, a testament to what 2 people with nothing but hope and determination could build. The story of how Olivia had arrived with nothing and Carson had told her she already had everything she needed became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as a reminder of where they came from and what truly mattered. In Tucumcari, where the town had grown from a small settlement to a proper city, there was a plaque in the library that read, "In memory of Olivia Anderson Keller, 1850–1925, whose courage and love helped build this community. She arrived with nothing and gave us everything." But perhaps the greatest legacy was the love story itself, a tale of 2 people who found each other against the odds and built something that lasted far beyond their own lives. It was a story about seeing value where others saw poverty, about recognizing that what truly matters cannot be carried in a trunk or measured in dollars. It was about the courage to start over, the wisdom to accept help, and the faith that love could transform everything. And in the end, Carson had been absolutely right. Olivia had arrived with everything she needed. She had brought herself, her heart, her strength, and her capacity to love. Those things had been enough to build a life, a family, a legacy that would endure for generations. She had arrived with nothing, but she already had everything. She just needed someone to see it, and Carson Keller had seen it from the very first moment. That recognition, that fundamental belief in her worth, had been the seed from which everything else grew, and it proved that sometimes the most valuable things in life are the ones we carry inside ourselves all along.